So, Trevor, I want to get into this matchup. This is the Notre Dame defense against the Georgia Tech offense. And this matchup is really fascinating because this, to me, is strength on strength. And you look at the numbers, Notre Dame ranks 8th in the country in scoring defense. They're only giving up 11.7 points per game, despite playing actually, they've played 3 teams that have been ranked at some point in time this season so far. And they're giving up only 270 yards per game, which is even better than last year's mark. That ranks 11th in the country. They're giving up 4.3 yards per play, which ranks 4th in the country this season. Notre Dame ranks 20th in red zone defense. They're 10th in red zone touchdown defense. They're 10th in third down defense. They're 7th in the country. They've only allowed 5 plays of 30 yards or more, and they rank 26th in the country by forcing 10 turnovers. You go to the other side of the ball. Georgia Tech ranks 41st in the country in scoring offense at 32.9 points per game. They are 32nd in the country at 444.6 yards per game. And then they also rank 26th in the country in yards per play at 6.7 yards per play. Georgia Tech's offense has actually been pretty good this year. In most instances, they had a not so great performance against Louisville. They've also played a couple stingy defenses, in my opinion, and I thought they left points on the board against Florida State. So, but that's a rare thing for them because, as you see, Trevor, Notre Dame has the 20th ranked red zone defense. Georgia Tech's red zone offense is 7th, and their red zone touchdown offense is 11th. And what do they have on their team that is similar to Notre Dame's really good red zone offense? Oh, that's right. A really good running quarterback who's got 6 rushing touchdowns on the season and averages 5.7 yards per carry. That would be it. Yep. And, of course, Jamal Haynes is really starting to finally heat up. He was a little bit late to the party for the 2024 season, as he was my preseason first-team all-opponent running back. He failed to even get to 90 yards until Game 6. And he broke out against Duke with 128 yards, 6.7 per carry. And this past week against North Carolina, he ran for 170 yards, averaged 9.0 yards per carry, and had 2 touchdowns, including what was essentially a walk-off long touchdown run. How much time was on the clock when he brought it? Was like less than a minute.
Seconds. Yeah, right? It was like 12 or 16 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big-time play. Very talented back, and he's heating up. Part of the reason he's heating up is the offensive line's getting better, and they're playing better. It's not a coincidence. And so we'll talk more about that, but this is a dangerous Georgia Tech offense. This is not a Georgia Tech offense, in my opinion, that's just like this, oh my gosh, like remember when people were freaking out about Syracuse back in 2018 and how many points they were scoring? I don't know if Notre Dame can stop this team, blah, 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 blah. And then Notre Dame shut it down because it was kind of a paper tiger. They'd scored a lot of points against teams that weren't that good. And Georgia Tech is not that. This is a good offense. It's not a juggernaut. Man, they may go score 40 on Notre Dame, and there's nothing Notre Dame can do about it. If they scored that many points, it's because Notre Dame played really poorly, and most likely really poorly on offense, and gave them several short fields. But this is a team that is good enough to beat you because of their offense. Because, as you mentioned yesterday, Trevor, this might be the most balanced team that Notre Dame's going to play this year. Because you could say Louisville, but Syracuse's pass game concerns me more than Louisville's run game.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. And that's really the difference for me.
This is definitely very much a best on best matchup. And the two stats that stick out to me the biggest is red zone touchdowns, because Notre Dame ranks 10th in percentage, but only allowing 5 touchdowns on the season puts them at 3rd in the country. And then with Georgia Tech, their percentage gets them at 11th, but scoring 21 touchdowns in the red zone puts them at 6th on the season. So that is very much a best on best matchup. Now, Notre Dame does a really good job of not allowing teams getting into the red zone, right? Which is a huge strength of theirs. It's red zone touchdown percentage for me, and then the turnovers for me is going to be a huge, huge indicator of how well Notre Dame, because Georgia Tech is a team that takes care of the football, man. 2 lost turnovers on the season through 7 games is really impressive.
Which is a completely polar opposite of who they were last year. I mean, Haynes King alone last season, Trevor, had 16 interceptions by himself. Georgia Tech last year, just to put this into context, Georgia Tech last year ranked 95th in college football in turnovers lost. They had 21 turnovers lost last year. They've had 2 in the first 7 games this season. That's the sign of what, Trevor? Good coaching.
Sure is.
Really good coaching that you can make that big of a turnaround in 2 years. And it's not like they're playing bum defenses so far either. Louisville's got a scrappy defense. Duke's got a good defense. You know what I mean? Like, they've played a couple quality defenses so far. And that's a really big turnaround. Really big turnaround.
100%. If Notre Dame can force a turnover in this game, I think that has to be an emphasis, because I think Notre Dame has Notre Dame generated a turnover in every game that they've played?
I believe so. Let me go look at that real quick. I believe they have, because they forced a fumble against Northern Illinois, right? I'm pretty sure they had at least 1 turnover in that game.
I believe so.
Let's
and
see
I know they did.
The Northern Illinois game was the one that they did not force a turnover.
Well,
then the one game. Yeah.
So in every game that Notre Dame has won, they've generated at least 1 turnover. And I think that's something that's going to stay consistent. Now,
they've generated at least 2 turnovers in all but 2 games.
Gotcha.
Because they only forced 1 against Stanford, and they forced 2 against A&M, 2 against Purdue, 2 against Miami of Ohio, and 3 against Louisville. And Louisville came to that game with 0 turnovers on the season up to that point in time in the season.
Now, I'm not saying that if Notre Dame doesn't generate a turnover, they're not going to beat Georgia Tech. That's not what I'm saying. But that is going to be a huge indicator for how well this defense is playing, because there's a lot of questions around, how they're going to overcome these injuries, and Ben Morrison's out, and you still have the edge rushers that are out for the rest of the season. So them being able to generate a turnover is going to be huge in this game. I really do believe so, because everything else is it's what these teams do the best. It's what Notre Dame does not allow teams to score a lot of points on them. You guys see it up there. It's 11.7 points per game. And Georgia Tech is, despite their rank being 41st, they come in averaging almost 33 points a game. So this is an offense that can move the ball really well. They can hurt you in many different ways. Brian and I have talked about it multiple times throughout the week that this is probably the most balanced offense that Notre Dame's defense will play all year. So really excited to watch. It's going to be another really good best on best matchup. And it's, again, going to put Notre Dame's defense to the test. And if they come out and perform well, and how we believe that they should, after a slow start against Stanford and a decent performance against Louisville, it will really start to hit home about, Notre Dame's defense is still one of the best in the country.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is, Trevor, that's 2 games in a row where the Notre Dame defense has got off to a slow start. That's a little concerning for me. It is. It's a little concerning for me, because that's usually the opposite of what they've done. Now, the good news is the offense has kind of bailed them out both times, which is obviously a positive. But yes, that is the interesting thing, is they have not actually started well in each of their last 2 games against Louisville and Stanford. And so that's going to have to change, because, again, we'll talk about it tomorrow, but you don't want to let this team get into an early rhythm. You really don't. You don't want to get them confident early in the game offensively, whether Haynes King plays or not. And again, we'll see. We're going to treat this like he's going to play, right? Because we went through this with Riley Leonard. There's all the talk, he's got a torn this and he's not going to play, and he may be out, and then he went out that next game and rushed for 100 yards. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's going to be an interesting part of it. So, let's get into this matchup. And this is an interesting one, because I think Georgia Tech is a little bit more dangerous than their total yards per game passing might otherwise show. Notre Dame pass defense, Trevor, they rank 6th in college football in fewest yards allowed per game, 7th in fewest yards per attempt, 2nd in lowest completion percentage. They rank 12th in fewest touchdowns allowed, 19th in interceptions, 5th in pass efficiency defense, 11th in fewest plays of 30 yards or more against Georgia Tech, who ranks 7th in college football with 12 pass plays of 30 yards or more. They rank 38th in yards per attempt, 10th in completion percentage this season, and they've only allowed 1 sack for -1 yard all season. That is a very interesting story. And now you look at these numbers and they look great. Notre Dame has the advantage, but now you're playing this game without your best corner in Benjamin Morrison, and you're playing this game without your my opinion, two best edge rushers so far in Jordan Patel and Bubakar Traore. It goes to what we talked about yesterday, Trevor. At what point in time does Notre Dame hit that point of no return in the pass game? And we'll talk more about the specific players involved when we get to the game records part. But this is going to be really, really fascinating. And I'm very curious to see what Georgia Tech does coming out early to test the Notre Dame secondary without Benjamin Morrison. Or do they just say, we're going to keep doing what we do? Or do they come out and say, hey, let's take advantage of this young guy?
Defense is going to have to buckle up, man. I mean, this is going to be, I don't want to say the most unsure, but I mean, honestly, up to this point to the season, it is the first game that I'm going to watch of Notre Dame's defense where I do have more question marks than I did at the beginning of the season due to the lack of due to their injuries, right? Their lack of depth is starting to be a little bit more apparent on the depth chart that gets released at the start of every week, especially in the cornerback room. So I agree with you 100%. Georgia Tech is going to go after, and we said it earlier this week, Leonard Moore is going to have to get ready because they're going to come at him in a lot of different ways. The pass rush is going to have to find creative ways to get home, which does go beyond just the defensive line, but the defensive line is going to have to play another really good game this week and moving forward to continue to help out their pretty banged up secondary. So it's going to be a really interesting matchup. When I look at these two stat sheets, the two that stick out to me the most are definitely sacks and sacks allowed between the two teams. But I agree with you. I think Georgia Tech, from a performance standpoint, and this kind of goes to that eye test that you and I were talking about, I think that they are performing above what their national rank is, if I'm just being 100% honest, because this is a dangerous passing attack, right? Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton are two receivers that can beat you over the top 100%, and they will. So going to be interested to see what they do from a personnel standpoint and from a schematic standpoint to help out a pretty banged up defense. So edge rushers are going to have to do a good job of stepping up in the pass rush today or this Saturday. Linebackers are going to have to do their part in the pass rush as well because they're going to be involved in some fashion, which I believe that they should. I don't think Notre Dame should drop back 7 every single time. So, yeah, really interested to see what they do from that standpoint, because getting pressure on Haynes King, making him uncomfortable early, especially if he is banged up, if he is deemed good to go, because I'm all for preparing for Haynes King to play. But if he does, he's not 100% healthy. He sat out the majority of the fourth quarter of the North Carolina game in a close game. It's not like it was a blowout and they took him out just to keep him healthy. Like it was a 1-possession game when he sat out.
Right.
So going to be interested to see what happens.
Well, and Trevor, if he does play too, here's the thing about Haynes King this season that would not have been true in past seasons, in my opinion. They don't need him to run for him to still be effective.
100%.
Now, obviously against North Carolina, he struggled a little bit. But if you look at how he's played this season, like against some of these other teams, he ran very well against Louisville. I mean, first score of the game, he runs right up the middle on the design run for score, but he threw for 312 yards that game. He went 21 of 32 for 312 yards. Threw for 275 yards against VMI. He went threw for 266 yards against Syracuse, completed 74.4% of his throws. He went 24 of 29 for 275 yards and 2 touchdowns against Georgia State. And they didn't throw a ton against Florida State. He went 11 of 16. Remember, it was really rainy and wet that day. But he completed 68.8% of his throws and averaged 9.1 yards per attempt. So he's been very effective as a thrower. So even if he plays, but he can't run as much, I still worry about him a little bit in the throwing game.
Sure.
The interesting thing is the kid that is now stepping in to the lineup, if for some reason he can't go, is a transfer from Baylor, a kid named Zach Pyron, who Notre Dame actually tried to recruit out of high school as part of the 2022 class early on. So, he's got a couple starts under his belt in his career. Actually, I'm thinking of somebody else. Is that the kid that signed with Baylor? Let me see if this is the same kid, because it's showing this kid only played yeah, this is the kid. So yeah, he originally signed with Baylor, I believe, out of high school, but looks like he's only played with at Georgia Tech so far. So I'm actually thinking of a different kid. I'm thinking of a kid at the Baylor. This is a kid that we evaluated. John Garcia and I evaluated. So yes, this kid went to Georgia Tech. But he might have flipped from some. He did. He flipped from Baylor. I am right. I believe on that one. So, but anyway, I remember watching this kid out of high school, and he's not a bad quarterback, Trevor. He's a kid that I look at and say, look, he doesn't have a lot of experience, but he has started a couple games in his career. He's not some neophyte kid that's never played a meaningful down of college football. And so you look at it and say, hey, this kid isn't I was right. He did commit to Baylor. I just looked at his rivals profile. I was like, I swear I looked at this kid. He was at Baylor. But no, he was committed to Baylor. So I did get that right. But this is a kid that's a thrower. He's a decent athlete. He can run a little bit, but this is a kid that can throw. And so you look at it and say, okay, they protect the quarterback. They've got talented receivers. That's the perfect ingredient for a backup quarterback to come in and still have success.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get down to it, can Notre Dame put pressure on them? That's going to be a big key. Now, Louisville was actually able to get some decent pressure on the quarterback. They had Pro Football Focus has them down for getting 18 hurries in that game. It's one of the few good games Ashton Gillott has played this season, but they had 18 pressures on him. Not a lot of other teams have had that kind of success putting pressure on him, to be completely honest with you. So that's going to be a big key to this game, Trevor, is if you have to go to the backup quarterback and he doesn't have, they can't get pressure on him, you're going to be in for a long day, in my opinion, because they do have some pass catchers that can do some damage to you. I mean, I'm looking at through their stats this season, Trevor, and I'm like, Georgia State had 2 pressures against them. Syracuse had 7. VMI had 9. I mean, you're talking about playing teams that they're not even giving up double digits and just hurries, just total pressures, all of them together. And Notre Dame has not been a team that's been great at producing a lot of consistent pressures, especially without your 2 best pass rushers aren't even playing in this game, so at least your outside pass rushers. So I'm very curious, Trevor, to see if Notre Dame can find some ways to get after the quarterback in this game. That's going to be a big, big part of this matchup. And when you look at the numbers, it's a little concerning, to be completely honest with you. It really is. Duke had 3 pressures against them, by the way, just kind of going through all their games. North Carolina had 18. So actually that's Georgia. North Carolina had 2, excuse me. And Duke had, actually, let's go back here. North Carolina had 2 pressures against Georgia Tech, and Duke had 5. That's it. I mean, so they've done a great job of really protecting their quarterback, which is where you get concerned about a backup stepping in and thriving, in my opinion. So it's going to be interesting. Very interesting to see if they're going to be able to figure that out without Benjamin Morrison against a talented group of receivers.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to be interested to see what Al Golden does from a schematic standpoint, because he is known for dialing up pressure, especially on down and distance situations. And before, when you're Al Golden, you can think, well, I can kind of leave my corners out on an island somewhat, right? Because I have Benjamin Morrison and Christian Gray. But now when you look at it, Christian Gray, and I think he's fine. I think he was just a little rusty last week after missing the Louisville game. But to your point, what you brought up yesterday, he is now the guy. He's it. He's the dude now in that cornerback room. And now you have a true freshman in Leonard Moore. So I'm going to be interested to see how comfortable Al Golden is going to be by saying, all right, Leonard Moore, this is what we asked Benjamin Morrison to do. I don't think he's going to do it a ton, if at all. But I'm going to be interested to see, because that is one thing that made Notre Dame's defense so dangerous is they ran the most man coverage out of any team this season at over 55%. I'm going to interested to see what that shift is going to be, because that allowed you to give like your linebackers freedom to, double A gap blitz up the middle and try to dial up pressure that way. And you kind of leave your corners out on an island a little bit before they had the experience and the skill set to do it. I'm not saying that Leonard Moore might not have the skill set to do it, but the experience is going to be something different. So I honestly might go back and look at the Louisville game and see what they did there, but they still even had Ben Morrison for the majority of that.
They mixed up their coverages a lot in that game.
Okay.
They did, but it wasn't just it was also to Benjamin Morrison's side. There was a play that I talked about where people were like, I think Benjamin got beat there. And I was like, no, he was playing cover 2. He was in trail, and there was a safety coming over top. But yeah, so those are aspects of it you look at and say, how are they going to handle it? And it's a different type of receiving core where Ja'Cory Brooks is a tall, long, vertical player. These are shifty, fast slot guys that are going to get you chasing across the field a lot. Georgia Tech does a lot of stuff that we wish Notre Dame would do more of getting your guys running across the field, running screens, jet sweeps, crossers, overs, drags, things like that. And it puts you in a different bind than having to cover somebody vertically. And it's going to be a very unique test. And then, of course, the Georgia Tech rushing attack is the best part of what they do, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Either side of the ball. This is the best part of their football team. And especially now that it's really getting rolling with Jamal Haynes finally getting going. Because you can say, well, you lose Haynes King, and that's one of the best parts of your rushing attack. And that's true. And it'd be like them losing Notre Dame losing Riley Leonard. I mean, it's going to impact your rushing attack. But like Notre Dame, Georgia Tech has two really good backs that can handle the load if the quarterback's not part of your run game. And again, Zach Pyron has 4 rushing touchdowns this season, the backup quarterback. So he can come in off the bench. He had 2 rushing touchdowns against VMI. He had one against Florida State on a quick dive. Had one against Duke where they put him in a sort of like a red zone type of situation. So again, this isn't a stiff that's going to sit back in the pocket, but you're not going to be as afraid of him as you are Haynes King. But they have a running back. Jamal Haynes is averaging 5.6 yards per carry. Chad Alexander is averaging 5.6 yards per carry. Jamal Haynes is coming off of a 1,000-yard season last year against he rushed for 1,059 yards last season. And he's on pace to be about that this season, especially with the pace he's on right now with his last 2 games. So it's going to be very interesting to see if Notre Dame can have some success. Notre Dame ranks 45th in the country in rushing yards allowed. Georgia Tech ranks 25th in rushing. Notre Dame ranks 34th in yards per attempt. Georgia Tech ranks 20th. Notre Dame only ranks 87th in tackles for loss allowed. Georgia Tech ranks 26th in fewest tackles for loss allowed per game. Notre Dame ranks 41st in the country with 6 runs allowed of 20 yards or more. Georgia Tech ranks 6th in the country in most runs of 20 yards or more at 17. So this is going to be a battle, and this to me ultimately is going to be the key, because if they come out and they're balanced and they're running it and throwing it, you're going to be in trouble. And I'm fascinated, Trevor, to see if Al Golden adjusts his game plan to be more geared towards shutting the run down in this game. And if he does that then expose them to some big plays from Eric Strickland and Malik Rutherford? That's going to be the fascinating aspect of this game, in my opinion.
Looking at these stats, it's weird from Notre Dame from a rushing standpoint, because it almost looks like their mentality on defense from a rushing standpoint is like that bend but don't break mentality. Like, you give up 3.4 yards per carry, which isn't a lot, but it's not awesome. Doesn't rank you in the top 25. You are outside of the top 40 in terms of yards per game, but you've only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns all year, which ranks you 4th. So I think that is interesting, but I think with a team like this, you still have to Notre Dame's defense, their identity is still playing to the strength of our defense, which is the passing game. And despite not having Ben Morrison anymore, I still believe that is still the strength of Notre Dame's defense right now until shown otherwise. But you would have to think that top of mind priority is not letting their 3-headed monster in the backfield eat. Because again, we've talked about it, this is a very balanced offense. And if they're able to do that, Haynes King likes to take a lot of shots off of play action. That's where Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton play really well. They took a couple of play action shots deep across the middle against Louisville. They tried to do it a little bit against North Carolina last week as well. So stopping the run has to be top of mind for Al Golden, and it will be a little bit of an identity shift for him. I'm not saying sell out and just load the box with 8 guys every single time. That's not what I'm saying. But it has to be a little bit more like different mindset from what it was against Louisville of like, well, we're kind of picking our poison here and we'd rather elect to stop the pass over just shutting them down. It can't be like that this game. Just can't be.
It's going to be a long day. If you dare Georgia Tech to run the ball and you're willing to give up some of those gains that you were willing to give up against Miami of Ohio and Louisville, it's going to be a much longer day for you. Much longer day for you. Now, we have seen games where Notre Dame came out this season and they were focused on shutting down the run. The Purdue game was one of those. They were not at all afraid of Purdue's receivers, the big, slower guys. So we're going to play man outside and we're going to be geared towards shutting down the run. And they ate Purdue's run game up. Now, listen, I know that Purdue sucks. I get it. But Purdue has 3 games this year of over 200 yards rushing, right? And Notre Dame held them to a season low in rushing yards and in yards per attempt at 1.5 and 38. I mean, they shut that team down. A week later, they went out and played Oregon State, ran for 263 yards. So, that was a strong performance, and it was geared towards shutting down the run.
100%.
You know, I felt like against A&M, they were a little bit more focused on the throwing game early, but did try to, you know, shut down the run, or at least slow the run game down, which I thought they did a decent job of. You know, against Louisville, they kind of were going to let them do their thing, and Louisville ran really effectively on them. The numbers against Louisville are very misleading. They held them to 131 yards, but that was because they had a minus 42-yard loss on a punt. You know, they'd have been over 170 yards in that game. And so they did a pretty decent job of shutting down the Stanford run game, but Georgia Tech has a much better offensive line than Stanford, if we're being honest. And you know, that was actually a bit of a positive sign for me, because even though they gave up a couple quarterback scrambles, overall, they really shut down the Stanford running game while not sacrificing the passing game. And that's my hope, is that they can do it against Georgia Tech as well. But that's going to be a big, big key to this football game, Trevor. Big, big key.
100%.
So, Mr. Trowbridge, we've done a nice job, I think, of breaking this game down. Now it's time to move into our next section of the show. But before we do that, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and of course, as always, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via your podcast platform, and make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.